corporations, could be paying higher taxes. That continues to be consistent with what the president talked about. He had a different proposal he put forward than the one Senator Warren has put forward, but you know, as is always the case with democracy in action, when it's the appropriate time, I'm sure they'll discuss, and he will discuss with others what their views are of how to address this moving forward.
And then also, the EU is starting legal action against the United Kingdom for not honoring Brexit conditions. Does the U.S. support this action, and is the president particularly concerned given his support for the Good Friday Agreement?
Yeah. Let me see if I have something on this for you, and if not, I'm happy to get something for you after the briefing. We continue to encourage both the European Union and the UK government to prioritize pragmatic solutions to safeguard and advance the hard-won peace in Northern Ireland. We would, of course, encourage you to speak to those governments directly about any legal actions. President Biden has been unequivocal in his support for the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. This agreement has been the bedrock of peace, stability, and prosperity for all the people of Northern Ireland, and we also welcome cooperation between our British and Irish counterparts on the Northern Irish Protocol. Go ahead, Hans.
Just quick housekeeping one.
Sure.
When does Gene start?
Let me see what I have here for you. I do know he's currently in California, and so he'll be working remotely for a period of time until he has his vaccine. Let me see if I have a timeline for him. I'll check on that for you, Hans.
Just a quick follow-up, and maybe I'm too, but will he be in the West Wing or the EOB?
Where will his office be?
Yes.
Well, he will be working remotely for some period of time. His title will be White House American Rescue Plan Coordinator and Senior Advisor to the President. Try to fit that on a card. I don't know. Long one, but impressive. He'll work out of the White House and have a team working with him. In terms of where his office will be, I'm not sure that's been formally determined quite yet.
Okay, and then Zeke's question is sort of, does the president have any opinions or sort of thoughts on how Americans should be spending that they're getting their stimulus checks? More broadly speaking, all this money that's going to be coursing through states and localities and cities, does the president have any sort of preferences? Does he have any red lines of what they shouldn't do? If there are any tax cuts, would that bother him? How is he thinking about the money once it goes out the door to states and localities?
Well, the original purpose of the state and local funding was to keep cops, firefighters, other essential employees at work and employed, and it wasn't intended to cut taxes. So I think he certainly hopes that that's how the funding is used. But part of the implementation of it will be under the purview of our soon-to-be starting coordinator and senior advisor to the president, and I'm sure he'll be focused on that.
As money's coming into states and localities, and in some cases it hasn't been as disastrous as was maybe earlier thought it might be, and the shortfall isn't as great. Some of the states and localities could find themselves with surpluses. And so I guess what you're saying here is that the president, and Gene by extension, would be opposed to any tax cuts that any states or localities would pass through, that they'd rather have it be more on the building front or more on the hiring front. Am I hearing you correctly?
Well, I think the intention, as we've long talked about, was to keep people in their jobs and their roles. If there's like cops and firefighters and others, if there are surpluses, I'll have to talk to our NEC team if what considerations they have for that particular issue. Go ahead.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Just circling back to Governor Cuomo, the Washington Post reported on Sunday that a top Cuomo advisor, who also happens to be New York's vaccine czar, called county officials to gauge their loyalty to Cuomo amid his sexual harassment investigation. I wanted to see if the president is concerned that vaccine distribution in New York has become politicized, and is the administration taking any steps to make sure that political favoritism is not tainting access to vaccine for New Yorkers?
Well, first, let me say we all read those stories. One was in your outlet. There were a number of other stories out there, and certainly we found them concerning about this inappropriate reported behavior. There are a number of checks in the system, I will say. The CDC has the ability to track and monitor distribution, and we've talked about this a little bit before as it relates to equitable distribution of vaccine supply. And so every vaccine box is tracked and we know where it's going, and the CDC can track that and monitor. And if there are, we work to ensure that it is equitably distributed and that there are not steps that are taken that are concerning. The other piece is that we work with local health officials across the state, right? We work with officials, who are overseeing distribution in all of the different cities, localities, to ensure that they are getting what they need, that there are no breaks in the system, and we are engaged across the board, especially in a state like New York, and we certainly track any concerns that come up. There we were concerned, of course, about the reports of this inappropriate behavior, but we also have a number of steps that are already in the system to ensure that the people of New York, the people of any state, are getting the vaccines distributed fairly and equitably.
Given those reports over the weekend, did you take any extra steps to take another look at, especially at New York? Because the allegation is quite concerning, I would think, for not only on New Yorkers, but all Americans.
Of course, we are constantly monitoring. I've not been made aware of any incidents that have been raised in relation to this report. There are regular reports out of states that we take a look at, even before this report. But if there is, I can see with our team if there's anything new as it relates to this report from this weekend.
And then also, on Cuomo, just following up from an earlier question, it's our understanding that Governor Cuomo he doesn't merely participate in these calls, these COVID calls, but he is in fact leads them and is a big player in terms of organizing them. And so we're curious if the president has any concerns with that, with his sort of level of leadership over this critical piece in, the COVID response.
Well, it would be up to the NGA to determine if they were to make a change on that front. It's also up to the legislature and others in New York to determine if he still has the confidence of the people in the state. But our focus from here, from the federal government, is of course supporting that independent investigation, which we adamantly do, but also working with governors across the country, with the NGA, with the DGA, with others, to address issues that come up, or hear from them and listen to them and work with them on COVID and addressing COVID, getting the pandemic under control, et cetera. And we will continue to work with a range of governors across the country.
Under the Trump administration, it was not set up this way. My understanding is under the Trump administration, Vice President Pence was doing these weekly calls. And this has been a shift to go from Pence to somebody like Governor Cuomo at this point. So I'm wondering if perhaps the White House wants to shift it back towards the White House or away from the NGA, which happens to be led by a governor who has a lot of things going on in the state at the moment.
Well, one of the reasons that it's been set up to engage directly with governors is that there were operational aspects of the way the last administration approached COVID and approached COVID, the distribution of vaccines, or approached planning and engagement with governors that wasn't working. They didn't feel they had the information they needed. They didn't know when they were getting vaccine supply. And our effort was to work much more directly in a range of means, in a range of ways, up and down the ranks in these states to ensure that we were addressing the local needs as they came up. So I'm not aware of any plan to shift that approach.
Comfortable with Cuomo essentially leading these weekly calls?
Again, this is up to, I think he's in that position because he is head of the NGA, and it's up to the NGA to determine if that's where they want to see things moving forward.
Just quickly on immigration, given the FEMA deployment to the border, I wanted to see if the administration is going to ask Congress for any additional emergency money to secure the border or fund resources to house or provide additional care for children who are there.
The problems is there's an immigration bill that we've certainly proposed that we hope that members of both parties will take seriously and engage in a constructive conversation about. The issues and challenges we're facing are not solely about funding at all, but I'm not aware of additional requests for immediate funding. I'm happy to check on that as well.
And then one absolute last question about this is related to some appointments at the Department of Justice. My colleague Nancy Cook of Bloomberg News wrote a story last week, I believe, noting that liberal groups are growing concerned that there are a number of attorneys who are being appointed to top positions who have a background of defending large companies, including connections to Apple and Facebook. And these groups are asking that some of these attorneys recuse themselves in matters of antitrust matters. I'm just wondering if the administration or the White House shares that concern and is considering asking them to recuse themselves on some of these larger big tech antitrust matters that will be coming up, presumably.
I'd have to look at it more closely. It may be a decision for the Department of Justice to make, but I will look more closely and see if we have a view from the White House about recusals. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. Go ahead in the back. Go ahead in the back.
Thank you very much, Jen. Quick follow-up on the border. Does President Biden plan to visit the border?
I don't have any trips to preview for you at this point in time. If we do, we will certainly preview them.
Something he's considering or talking about?
I don't have anything to preview for you.
Okay, going back to the vaccine. I know you say the goal is to vaccinate Americans first, but I want to go back to the AstraZeneca supply sitting here in the U.S. without approval. Many countries are seeking, Brazil is also seeking access to the supply. Brazil is in urgent need. Scientists around the world are saying that Brazil is a threat to the world right now, the situation there, the crisis there. Dr. Fauci said last week that the most important thing to do in Brazil is to get more people vaccinated as soon as possible. But Brazil is struggling. So when can we expect that these countries that need it right now and can use right now because they have the approval there, when can we expect they can have access to maybe this supply, maybe in June or July?
Well, we are engaged with a range of countries. I'm certain with Brazil as well about their requests. And we are, of course, focused. The president is focused on ensuring that all Americans, all adult Americans are vaccinated. That's the first objective here. But we are looking forward to being, players in the global community's effort to address the global pandemic. There was a significant announcement made on Friday coming out of the Quad Summit about supply that we have agreed to work with the Quad members to provide to a range of countries and regions. And we are certainly open to discussing and considering, when we can provide additional supply. But I don't have anything to preview for you, predict in terms of the timeline. We're going to have to just go on because otherwise we're not going to get to everybody. Go ahead.
So a new poll from NPR and Marist said that nearly half of Republican men won't get the vaccine when it's available to them. And I know that last week you said that the Democratic administration might not always be the best messenger to communicate to everyone kind of the importance and the benefits of getting the vaccine. And so I just wanted to ask if the White House is making plans to try to boost Republican receptivity to the vaccine. And can you share what any of those ideas are?
Sure. First, the president's goal is to vaccinate all Americans, not just those who voted for him. Right now, the phase we're in is that demand for the vaccine still outstrips supply. We won't be in that phase forever, but right now the big issue is access and people wanting to have access to the vaccine. And so we're focusing on how to make it as convenient and accessible for Americans as possible. And I talked about this very briefly last week, but we know we need to meet everyone where they are, and that includes conservatives and ensure there are trusted messengers who lead the way in those engagements. 81% of Republicans said they would trust their own doctor or health care provider in some polling that came out this weekend to provide reliable information about a COVID-19 vaccine. This is consistent with what I was conveying last week and some of the data that we've seen internally about how, yes, there are a number of prominent officials out there who, if they were more vocal about getting the vaccine, we'd certainly support that. But also doctors and local health providers we see poll after poll, are one of the most trusted authorities in communities, regardless of people's political affiliation, as are religious leaders and local leaders as well. So we are very mindful of that and thinking of ways to support, empower, help fund those efforts. We're also meeting regularly with conservative groups, faith leaders, and rural stakeholders to partner with them in boosting vaccine confidence. But I also have a couple of examples that I found interesting. Hopefully you do as well. We are focused on earned media and establishing partnerships with trusted messengers right now. We will quickly move to a a big public campaign, which will be run out of HHS. There's even some funding in the American Rescue Plan for that will be a part of it that hopefully we'll have more to say on in a couple of weeks. But a couple of examples. Tomorrow, Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins will be hosting an event with evangelical leaders to discuss the vaccine and how we can partner with them. Dr. Collins has appeared on the 700 Club. We also have done, of course, a range of engagements with different communities where there's vaccine hesitancy. Dr. Nunez-Smith on the Shade Room. Dr. Fauci did an interview with Gloria Estefan, which now I want to go find and watch myself, as I'm sure many of you do. So we are trying to be creative on earned media to meet people where they are, but we're also mindful of empowering, supporting local trusted voices, because we've seen that in poll after poll to be an effective way of reaching a range of communities.
Dr. Fauci said recently that former President Trump getting involved in this would be a game changer for encouraging Republicans to take the vaccine. Do you guys agree? And does President Biden want to see Trump get involved in this messaging?
Well, if former President Trump woke up tomorrow and wanted to be more vocal about the safety and efficacy of the campaign, of the vaccine, certainly we'd support that. But also, I think what's important to note is that, as I noted, 81% of Republicans said they would trust their own doctor or healthcare provider, and that's an important place to invest. Every other living former president, or most of them, if not all of them, has participated in public campaigns. They did not need an engraved invitation to do so. So he may decide he should do that. If so, great. But there are a lot of different ways to engage, to reach out, to ensure that people of a range of political support and backing know the vaccine is safe and effective. Go ahead, Yamiche.
Thanks so much. First question is back on the border. There were lawyers who interviewed some children that were in facilities. The children described sleeping on the floor, being hungry, not seeing the sun for days. How is that acceptable for the Biden administration to keep children in those sorts of conditions, given the fact that you said you were in an administration that was going to be more humane than the previous one?
Well, let me first say this is heartbreaking. It's a very emotional issue for a lot of people, and it's very difficult and challenging. And obviously, these TBP facilities are not made for kids. So one of the reasons, or a driving reason why the president has pushed to take all of the actions that I outlined earlier when Phil asked the question, is because we want to expedite getting these kids out of these CBP facilities as quickly as possible. And that's our goal and our objective, and into shelters as quickly as possible, then into sponsored homes while their cases are being considered and adjudicated. We are trying to work through what was a dismantled and unprepared system because of the role of the last administration. It's going to take some time, but we are very clear-eyed about what the problems are and very focused on putting forward solutions.
And I understand the idea of these facilities not being designed by children, but children being hungry, sleeping on the floor, not being allowed outside for days at a time. Why is that acceptable to go on even for one more day? Why is that something that's not being outlawed right now? How is the administration not stopping that today?
Well, Yamisha, it's not acceptable. But I think the challenge here is that there are not that many options. So the options are, and we have a lot of critics, but many of them are not putting forward a lot of solutions. The options here are send the kids back on the journey, send them to unvetted homes, or work to expedite moving them into shelters where they can get health treatment by medical doctors, by educational resources, legal counseling, mental health counseling. That's exactly what we're focused on doing. And this is an across the administration effort that we are committed from the top to making changes on as quickly as possible.
You just talked about vaccine hesitancy. I know you said that there are going to be resources for Dr. Fauci and others in the administration to go out and reach out to trusted sources. Based on polling and conversations with experts, the government is not the answer for reaching a lot of the GOP men in particular that were found to be hesitant of the vaccine. Is it a waste of time to have those officials go there? And are there other things that the government should be doing that maybe are different than having the face of the people that many of these voters don't trust being the ones talking to them?
I don't mean to cut you off, but I think I just answered this exact question earlier with some of the specific steps we're taking and examples of people we're putting forward in our efforts to empower, support local medical doctors, experts who are very powerful and impactful voices in a range of communities. So that's exactly what we're doing, and I could not agree with you more. We agree with you, that we are not always the right voice, the Biden administration or somebody standing at this podium to a range of conservative communities, and we have to meet people where they are, which is why we're taking a number of approaches and using a number of tactics.
Of black leaders, some black experts saying that there was too much focus on the hesitancy in the African American community, and that might be used as an excuse for not having enough access to black people in this country, that this administration and others focus too much on black people and their hesitancy for the vaccine.
I may not be understanding your question. We're not
I would say this, leaders say that black people's hesitancy to the vaccine might be used as an excuse for low vaccination rates as well as access to the vaccine. So there are some that are saying when you talk too much about African American people and their hesitation to the vaccine, that then becomes an excuse. Those are the arguments that African American leaders and others are making right now.
an excuse within the community or an excuse for us?
Yeah, an excuse for the administration and others to say black people aren't getting vaccinated at higher rates because they're hesitant.
I would say that we just look at the data. Our objective is to ensure that all American adults have access to the vaccine, are vaccinated, and that we are doing everything we can to reach communities and people where they are. So our approach has been based on the data and the statistics we were looking at. We have taken a number of steps, including putting forward supporting more community health centers. Now there are 900 mobile clinics to get into communities, mass vaccination sites to ensure that the vaccine is accessible and in a range of communities where we did through data see hesitancy. So I would just refute that. I don't think that's an accurate description of our approach. I know we have to wrap this up here because I think you guys have to gather for the event, but.
Just while you were up here, there's some news out of Dallas at CBP and FEMA are setting up a detention center at the convention center that can house 300 migrant children, 3,000 migrant immigrant teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
Is that consistent with the administration's stated values, and what protections are being put in place in that facility to make sure that these teenagers are cared for?
Well, I'd have to look at the specific report. I would say that we have been looking at additional facilities to open, to move children, unaccompanied children, into facilities where they can receive access to health care, educational resources, mental health resources, legal resources, and certainly we would ensure that we are meeting the standard that we have set out, but I'd have to check into those specific reports since they happened while we were up here. Thank you, everyone.
Can you look at that now?